Ann Arbor Inclusive is produced in part with the Ann Arbor Commission on Disability Issues and CTN. The views and opinions expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Commission or CTN. For more information about the Commission on Disability Issues, visit a2gov.org/disability resources. If you have program topic suggestions, please email a2disabilityissues@gmail.com.
Hi, I'm Tom Holtland. I'm the host of Ann Arbor Inclusive, a program of the Ann Arbor Commission on Disability Issues. I'm excited about today's show because we'll be interviewing the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living. And the reason why that's a great connection with mine is that I have worked for the Ann Arbor CIL for a total combined over 20 years. So I know a lot about the CIL, but everything changed a couple years ago where everything was sort of turned on a dime and we had to figure out a way to provide services through the challenges of the pandemic. I'm really excited to also speak with Alex Gossage, who is our executive director, and Izzie Bullock, who is the employment program manager. They have a really good perspective on how things are going, and I think that you'll agree as we get into the interview. So welcome, Alex and Izzie, to Ann Arbor Inclusive.
Hey, Tom.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us today.
Yes. So nearly 2 years have gone by since the lockdown for the pandemic. And as we approach the 2-year mark in what seems to be the new norm, how is this affecting people with disabilities, in a different way than if we were open?
It is affecting people with disabilities in, I think, multiple ways. I think that due to the new virtual setting and the new dependency on Zoom and virtual meetings, it's creating a fostering a more inclusive society. It's fitting those populations that were once not able maybe to attend things, feel to attend and fully participate in a new way. But I also think it may be exclusionary in some ways. It may be excluding the people who do not have technology to be able to participate in those also virtual meetings, since there is such a strong lean towards the virtual setting.
Right. So I'm sure we've all heard of great hardships, such as I think everyone knows someone that passed away from COVID, and then if not, have been very sick. And we all know that people with disabilities, with some disabilities, are more susceptible to the virus. And so as an organization that we provide social services, what have been some of the hardest situations to experience over the last couple of years?
I would say initially when the lockdown began, there was definitely an increase in folks who were in some sort of crisis, whether it was related to there being a barrier to access to basic needs and basic food. There was difficulties with individuals who were in need of personal care assistance, but for whatever reason they were not able to get adequate personal care assistance. I think there were folks who were losing jobs and getting out of work, and so they needed assistance applying for unemployment and a lot of those kinds of things. That was definitely a big switch for the CIL, as we're not typically in the mode of handling crisis, but I think overall we did a really good job. I would say as the last couple of years have progressed, as you mentioned, it's almost been 2 years. I think we've seen a lot more social isolation, that being an issue. We have seen difficulty with access to adequate health care. And I think, lastly, as Izzie was talking about, that piece related to technology and there being a real need to get folks connected in the community because they were at home, they are isolated. And even as the community opens back up, they still are. And so getting them connected to support groups, movie club, art programs, one-on-one virtual peer mentoring that we do at the CIL, all of those kinds of things.
And on the other side, I'm sure we've seen some positive things that have come out in these 2 years of challenges with not being able to see people face to face. And can you recall anything like that you'd want to share?
Yeah, I think people with disabilities, as people with disabilities, we're really good at adapting to situations and adapting to environments that are difficult to navigate for us. And so in some ways, the pandemic was just another thing for us to have to navigate through. And I think we have seen opportunities open up for people with disabilities to participate in their communities more actively because so much was being done online. So I would say that's probably one of the bigger areas of positivity that we've seen. And I think there's also been some trends that maybe Izzie can speak better to related to employment.
Yes, thank you, Alex. So one of the biggest things I think that we see as a positive is we have people with disabilities now, which was once an unreasonable accommodation, now reasonable to work virtually. Telework was not a very common thing before the pandemic. It was something I think many people with disabilities wanted, but it was often deemed as unreasonable. But now that the whole world requires it, it is now accommodation that can be seen as reasonable and granting people more employment opportunities while getting the support that they need.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned this. I think there are a lot of employers and leaders that didn't really subscribe to remote work at all. And so I think they were forced into it and now I hope they see the same success that we've had at the center going completely remote. I would say personally on one of the programs that I worked with, we worked with the University of Michigan Physical Medicine Department that had a grant from the Nielsen Foundation to cover emergency funds for people with spinal cord injuries during COVID. And we were able to do so much with those funds. We were able to help get 2 people, prevent them from being homeless. We got one man that was going to be evicted, and just at the last moment, we got him approved to go into a program where he would receive rehab services. And so that was a real positive, but we were able to cover all kinds of costs, like people who couldn't pay their utility bills and people that couldn't pay for food and some of the basic needs that we all take for granted. So I thought that was a positive thing that we did with one of our biggest partners in our community. So technology plays such an important tool in handling the pandemic, just like today doing our interview through Zoom versus in studio. But tell me about technology use among people with disabilities and what challenges still remain on that topic.
Yeah, so when we look at technology, I think there are a lot of people with disabilities who have been able to engage in technology and do so very effectively because in some ways it assists them in activities of daily life, whether it's turning on lights at the house, calling somebody using their voice, creating lists for groceries, things of that nature. The big barrier always, I think, though, is first, it's access to that kind of hardware that you need. It's the cost. And the second part then would be making sure that somebody knows how to use whatever that device might be, or even the software that will create the accessibility for that device. So we were really happy in the last, or I would say, we were really happy that about 9 months into, I guess, what we could call the pandemic, we had the opportunity to partner with Area Agency on Aging 1B, as well as the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation to create a program we called the Technology Access Program. That program allowed us to distribute about 300 tablets to people with disabilities throughout Washtenaw, Livingston, and Monroe County. and then also provide those individuals with the basic sorts of technical assistance that they needed to make sure that they could use them. And what that could have been, use for taking part in one of our own workshops, but it also was helping them access doctor's appointments online. It was helping them ordering food or groceries or things like that online. And so we're really proud of that program, and we're looking forward to taking that program, which is evolving into the future. We had gotten out of technology there for a few years, and I think what we're going to see going forward are more opportunities to help educate people on technology use and assistive technology use especially.
That's great. And you mentioned on how to use it. Was there training or just explanations when they received their hardware, or was that done virtually?
So everything was done virtually. And there was training. I would say it was customized depending on the need of the individual. And so sometimes it was fairly basic. It was making sure they just knew the basic run of the user system, but then sometimes it had to be more detailed in helping folks navigate email or internet or what have you. And then also talking about making sure that they had access to broadband internet. That's been a huge issue that I think we're starting to see improvement, but helping folks figure out how to pay for broadband internet, as well as helping individuals in those parts of our community that don't have access to broadband to figure out ways to access the internet in an effective way.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's amazing that 300 tablets went out and essentially helped more than 300 people, because people have families and coworkers and so forth. So that's wonderful. So let's switch gears and let's talk about inclusion. I think sometimes people take that word for granted and don't necessarily know, well, what do they mean by inclusion? So we you guys submitted a video that you have with people with disabilities explaining exactly what inclusion is. So let's take a look at that now.
Inclusion means that not only does everyone have a seat at the table, but everyone's voice is heard.
Having all voices present and then using those voices and experiences to enact change.
Inclusion means being thought of as a worthwhile, valued member of society.
Inclusion is everything to a person with a disability.
People with disabilities face obstacles to inclusion in transportation, housing, education.
The biggest issue that the disability community seems to be facing is a lack of access.
A lot of careers aren't necessarily geared toward our skill sets.
Social isolation. That's a big problem with people with disabilities.
Isolation from resources and isolation from their own family members.
The Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living is a disability rights and advocacy organization.
Independence is really not a one-size-fits-all model, and it looks different to everybody.
The Center for Independent Living is all about advocating for people with disabilities.
Helping people with disabilities live their best life the way that they choose.
An outlet for guidance and support.
The CIL stands for inclusion.
My dream for inclusion is for anybody with a disability to be accepted in the community for who they are.
To have a deeper dialogue and more far-reaching understanding of what it means to have and live with a disability.
That no one will be denied the ability to direct their own life.
That the engagement of people with disabilities is never a second thought or an afterthought.
What we need from our community is action and to make sure that everybody has equal access to opportunities.
Assurance that we are valued. We need people around us to let us know that we are appreciated.
We need your help.
You know, that's a really moving video that explains exactly the experience of inclusion and exclusion, right? What do you think, Alex?
I think that's right. And I think Inclusion is something that folks with disabilities have been fighting for a long, long time. And, now more than ever, as so many of us are far apart and we're still talking with each other virtually, we need to make sure that we're finding ways to become, better connected, whether it's with friends, family, community members. But there are barriers to inclusion that are still out there. And maybe, Izzie, maybe you can speak a little bit to recommending to people how they can improve inclusion in the community.
I think one of the things, and this is my favorite quote, and maybe some of you have heard me say this before, is we often think of inclusion as making sure everyone has a seat at the table, but also making sure that everyone's voice at that table is heard. And so I think one thing is we need to make sure we are listening to people with disability and their voices and what they have to share, and not letting other people dictate what inclusion needs, but what they need to be included. Because ultimately, every person is they have their own definition of inclusion and what they need to feel included. So letting everyone express that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you made that, because that's the part that people don't get. And I hope this video that you guys brought will be shared with others. So let's talk about basic essentials. So we all know that employment, housing, and transportation are some of the biggest barriers for people with disabilities, without a pandemic. So add the pandemic, and where are we at with some of these essential needs?
I think overall, it's been easier for folks to get access to basic needs in these last several months than it was when the pandemic began. As you probably remember, there were a lot of shortages on goods. With transportation and other things shutting down, there was lack of access for people with disabilities to get around in our community. So they weren't able to go to food pantries and other places themselves. And so I think, really initially on, like I had said earlier, one of the things that we had to do was deal with these kind of crises. And I think as the pandemic has gone on, it's not that those sorts of things have gone away. There's still a need for housing, affordable, accessible housing. There's still a need for access to basic services, but it looks a little bit different now. There definitely have been strains on our systems and our communities, with a number of people out of work, with the lack of resources to be able to accommodate everybody in a variety of ways, including healthcare, I think, which we haven't talked about yet today. With COVID, with so many people in the hospital because of COVID, there's a number of individuals who are not able to get the healthcare that they need because there's not a bed open, or there's not an opportunity to have a surgery, or there's not even an opportunity to see their doctor in face-to-face, which is a big deal for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. So I know you work with Ann Arbor schools, and what's going on with the schools right now as far as the pandemic goes, and inclusion? Can you share anything about that?
I think right now a big struggle is, given that many districts get to decide what they need to do. So while some schools are in person fully with masks and other schools are hybrid, while some other schools are virtual, I think it's hard for students to kind of find their way to include it, because they have those three different things they have to combat, whether they're in person or hybrid, and you may not have full classrooms, and many students are still even getting sick to these days. So it's hard for students to be able to be social.
And I know that we did, for many, many years, we did the disability awareness workshops in all the elementary schools, most of the elementary schools, geared towards fourth graders. And obviously we can't do that with students not there, or even in the hybrid situations. So can you just briefly tell us about that program and where it stands right now?
Yeah, so where it stands is it's something that we're still aiming to do into the future when we can really get back into the schools. It was something that was growing, I think, prior to the pandemic, and allowing us to get into more schools throughout our 3 county service area. In the last couple of years, we haven't been able to get into the schools, so the main part of the program has been dormant, but I think we've also been able to engage in different ways. We did one disability awareness workshop out in a parking lot when the weather was much, much nicer than it is right now, so that folks were able to get connected that way in a safer setting. We have done a number of different virtual sessions where maybe we're having conversations with students and talking about disability and ableism and those sorts of things. And then I think one of the areas where maybe I should make sure to mention is that we have partnered with the University of Michigan and the Ann Arbor Public Schools and have been putting on, well, really it's one online virtual workshop for junior high level students and for physical education teachers to talk about accessible or adaptive recreation.
Okay, that's great. And so Izzie, I know we've talked a little bit about employment already, but are you seeing, did you see a drop in placements, or did you actually see an increase? Where do we stand with people getting jobs?
I think that in some places we are seeing that people are getting more jobs where they're able to work virtual, or there's a high need for people to be personal and care attendants. I think we're seeing that, but I also think we are seeing a decrease, as in the pandemic is still going on, but we are opening up, and so people are having to make the choice of, do I work to support myself and my family, or do I not work to keep my family's health safe and me safe? So I think it's a little bit of twofold there. I think in many ways we are seeing positive uphill, but then I think there are still downhill.
Yeah, we see help wanted signs everywhere, but that's, you know, that's only for entry level jobs. We've got folks with, you know, great career backgrounds that are looking for, you know, the next level up.
And I think where we see the help wanted, we see many people with disabilities that are working. They're working over 40 hours, 60, 80 hours, because there is that need for work.
Yeah.
So it's also that building that skill of self-advocacy, so they're able to advocate for themselves and let their worker know, I appreciate this job, but I also have to worry about my own well-being as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So overall, what can the community at large do to keep in mind about inclusion and so forth? Is there a message there?
I think the message is something that I always say to people is just continue to be a good citizen, be a good neighbor. Check on folks who live around you and people you know who maybe they need assistance with groceries on some days, or they need assistance with shoveling snow from the sidewalks and the driveways, and just staying connected with people. There's a lot of people, again, that are socially isolated, and just any sort of contact that they can get is important. I also think it's important that as our community opens back up and we're doing more and more in person again, that we not lose sight of this virtual piece. And so trying to make sure that when meetings are held, whether it's a community meeting or a private work meeting or even a social activity, that there's a virtual option for people to participate in. Even recently, Attorney General Nessel had put through an opinion that basically said she feels that with where we all are with technology right now, especially with government meetings, state meetings, there's no reason why there should not be accommodations for people with disabilities to participate as members of those commissions and boards or as members of the public. And then lastly, you know, for the CIL, I would probably be remiss if I didn't mention that, you know, just like every other organization, we have seen our share of financial strain, and we're always looking for that sort of support. And folks can assist us in that way by going to our website and looking at our Donate Now button, which is right on our homepage.
Thanks. I'm glad you included that, because there are people that will see this that will be motivated to help us in some way, and that's a really good point. So I think that's a great place to end. I wish we had more time, but we've gotten a lot of information out of this half-hour interview, including especially the video that talks about inclusion. And I like, Alex, that you pointed out just being really good citizens to each other and being neighborly and offering transportation to doctor appointments, just whatever you can to help out somebody with a disability or not. But I'm really glad to have spent this time highlighting our organization. And I'm very proud to have been a part of the CIL for this many years. And especially now, I think we were all skeptical on how we and other organizations would last through the pandemic. And what I've seen in what you have talked about, Alex, is that we not only survived, but we're actually thriving. We've rose to the occasion of those challenges, and things are going very well for the CIL, and I'm proud of that. So thanks again for joining us, Alex and Izzie, and for everyone at Ann Arbor Inclusive in the Ann Arbor Commission on Disability Issues. I'm Tom Holtland. We hope to see you next time on Ann Arbor Inclusive. Thank you.